Thank you and good morning. I'm Michelle Nance, Regional Planning Director with the Centralina Regional Council, and I want to thank you for being here for this second meeting of the Connect Beyond Policy Advisory Committee. Our conversation today comes at a pivotal time for our region as we envision growth in our transportation future past the COVID economic, we envision a transportation future that supports our post-COVID economic activity and provides regional connections as we think about access to jobs and healthcare and education and local access necessary for communities to prosper. Today, we're really excited to share the work that the project team has been working on, specifically the candidate high-capacity transit corridors that will serve as the spine for our regional transit network. When I say high-capacity transit corridors, I mean anything that has more capacity than a traditional bus, such as light rail, commuter rail, or express bus. Over 50% of the people in our two-state, 12-county region live in one county and work in another. The corridors we collectively decide upon now will shape how our region grows over the next 20 years and beyond. Because of the importance of this discussion today, we've invited our Technical Advisory Committee members and our Community Advisory Committee members to join us. The meeting is also being streamed live to Centralina's YouTube channel. Today, we're going to provide an update of where we've been with the project. We'll present the high-capacity transit corridors. Then we're going to have a discussion with regional leaders on how we make this plan a reality and how it can impact our communities for years to come. We've got a passionate group of regional leaders and experts with us today to talk about how mobility shapes every aspect of our quality of life and talk about some real ways that we can turn this vision into reality. We're asking you for your feedback and engagement. We will have someone monitoring the chat box throughout the meeting, so feel free to provide input or ask questions at any time. Your leadership, expertise, and local knowledge is critical to this process, so we want you to feel free to engage with us throughout. After the meeting, we will ask you to, and either you or your staff members, to help us get the word out about some public involvement opportunities. So let's take a look at the snapshot of where our project team has been since we began this effort. This list does not include every touch point, but it does give you a sense of how we've engaged our communities and others over the past few months. We've shared the candidate high-capacity transit corridors in small group sessions with every transportation planning organization in the project area. And now we're seeking your input before we share it with the public in October. Mobility changes will not be going away after the COVID pandemic. Creating more transportation choices that account for the changing needs of our community going forward is very important. Connect Beyond will take into account the current reality of our communities and extend the vision 20 years into the future to ensure that as we grow, our transportation network is not only resilient, but continues to serve as the underlying asset for all members of our communities. Our charge, which is to create a regional transit vision that includes innovative transportation solutions to enhance mobility and access for people living and visiting the area, does not change. We will continue to think very intentionally about how we achieve this vision, how the values of our communities are evolving, especially over the last months. I'd like to invite the chair of the Centralina Regional Council's Board of Delegates and Mooresville Commissioner Bobby Compton to say a few words. Bobby?
Thank you, Michelle. Good morning. I'm Bobby Compton, Centralina Board Chair and Commissioner for the town of Mooresville. Thank you to the Connect Beyond Technical and Community Advisory Committee members able to join the Policy Advisory Committee today for this very special conversation on regional mobility. And thanks to each of you for sharing your time and critical perspectives with the Connect Beyond project as this project unfolds. In my life and work, this regional vision for transit is important for a few reasons. As a lifelong resident of this region, I'm always looking for easier, better ways to travel. As an elected official, I'm constantly trying to answer questions or find solutions to transportation issues due to our growing population and growing congestion. As Centralina Board Chair, I lead a group of thoughtful and talented elected officials from across the region focused on collaboration and how we work towards a common vision that will serve our growing region. Coordination with transportation agencies such as the North Carolina Department of Transportation, the South Carolina Department of Transportation, the region's transportation and transit organizations, business and community interests, and local governments is essential to finding solutions and improving mobility options for all. Connect Beyond covers 12 counties, 2 states, 5,000 square miles, where 2.6 million people travel to live, work, and play. These numbers are big. Through Connect Our Future, which is our region's first growth framework, and the Regional Transit Engagement Series, coordinated with the Metropolitan Transit Commission, CATS Policy Board, chaired by Commissioner Harden, you have made it clear that our regional transit vision should be every bit as big. I look forward to listening to the conversation today, hearing your hopes, dreams, and needs, and furthering our collective vision for enhanced regional mobility. Thank you for joining us today. Then I'd like to recognize Susan Harden from the Metropolitan Transit Commission and a Mecklenburg County Commissioner. Susan.
Thank you, Commissioner Compton, for your leadership on this project that will impact our community for generations to come. And thank you for your service. As a fire and rescue professional for 31 years, you know firsthand the importance of good transportation network and how they save lives. As a Mecklenburg County Commissioner, I help to oversee the human services in the county, and transportation, we know, impacts health and welfare outcomes. The important thing about the Connect Beyond project is it requires us to get out of our silos and work together to address and improve our region. I believe in today's world, we need more togetherness and more steadfast determination to work together to make our community better, more connected. The regional transit planning process is important to the MTC as it will lay the groundwork for how CAT's 2030 plan fits into the greater region and makes connections beyond Mecklenburg County. Companies looking to invest in the region often inquire about our ability to move people. Our transportation choices available for our workforce. Is that transportation reliable and frequent? Does it connect to major employment centers and other key destinations? These are questions that we have to be able to answer. Having a plan for how transit moves people in the entire region is fundamental to our long-term success. I'm excited about this project. I'm pleased that the MTC and the Centralina Council of Governments have come together for this important topic. We have an incredible panel today, a great morning of learning. And so let's get started. I'm going to turn it over to Jason Wagner, who is the principal planner for the Centralina Council of Governments.
All right, thank you very much, Commissioner Harden. Good morning, everyone. As you heard, Jason Wager, I'm principal planner at Centralina Regional Council and also Connect Beyond project manager. Very excited to provide this overview and update and really hear from our speakers today. A lot going on. So if we go to the next slide, as you just heard, this is a very large project. Our region of 2.6 million people is expected to add another 1.4 million by 2045. And during this same time frame, the Charlotte region is expected to receive 2/3 of North Carolina's growth. Further, in the upstate of South Carolina, York and Lancaster counties have the highest growth rates in the region. And with this growth in new population, whether young professionals or seniors, we know specific transportation needs and expectations will grow with our ever diversifying region. And as our region continues to grow, access to reliable, efficient, and well-connected transportation options is one of the most important factors to ensure everyone can benefit from this growth. Indeed, this point was underscored during yesterday's panel hosted by the Charlotte Regional Business Alliance on Transportation Infrastructure, moderated by Connect Beyond Policy Advisory Committee member Tracy Montross of American Airlines. Panelists included Brent Cagle, Charlotte Airport Director, Dr. Wilbur Rich, a professor and author of a new book entitled The Transformative City, Charlotte Takeoffs and Landings, and Bob Morgan, former Charlotte Chamber CEO. The panel shared in multiple ways that looking ahead, especially during this challenging time, is critical, and that we have learned from past experiences that transportation investments are directly tied to our successful economic future. I have no doubt our panelists will dig even deeper today on these themes. So next slide. In other words, what I heard was the very work we are doing here, specifically the proactive development of a single coordinated vision for how we move around our region while honoring local interests and leveraging our collective strengths, is vital and extremely timely. This includes identifying those high capacity transit corridors that build upon and complement plans such as the CATS 2030 system plan you just heard mention of, and several other regional and local transportation plans. So next slide. In terms of project priorities, through the many roles you as advisory committee members play in your communities, such as business leaders, elected officials, local government staff, and community resources and more, the importance of the listed project priorities are probably not new nor a surprise. You also understand both the challenge of coordinating across such a large project geography and the importance of showing to those outside our region a unified approach on key topics and methods for regional collaboration that cross modes of transit and organizational boundaries. To be clear, we have heard from the region since kicking off the Regional Transit Engagement Series in 2017, and more recently through our Policy and Technical Advisory Committee's inputs on project mission and goals, that we must have both long-term actions and short-term wins that support these priorities. It's a combination platter, if you will. So moving to the next slide, I just mentioned goals. So speaking of these project goals, and as a reminder, the Connect Beyond project's purpose, goals, and vision set the framework for this entire initiative, guiding the technical work we undertake moving forward. As mentioned in earlier meetings and through a follow-up survey, we gathered feedback from the Policy and Technical Advisory Committees. Specific to the goals, we made three main additions I want to highlight. We added the word resilient to the third bullet to underscore the need for transit investments that can be maintained over time. We added environmentally sustainable investments and policies to underscore our commitment to ecologically sound approaches. And finally, we added advancement of equitable and community-driven improvements. This is our recognition of equity concerns flowing from policies of the past that have intentionally and unintentionally created divides in our community. We believe Connect Beyond is in an excellent position to explore how we can take a purpose-driven approach to ensure our recommendations around mobility meet the real needs of the community. And this intentionality is seen in one of our very first tasks you'll hear more about today, the identification of high-capacity transit corridors, which will be presented in more detail in a moment. Next slide. I want to turn briefly to some of the other updates and upcoming activities. In addition to project goals, we're currently analyzing existing transit system and gathering all sorts of related regional data. In parallel, stakeholder engagement is ongoing, and a public engagement survey will launch in October. Specific to our discussion today, as you can see starred in the graphic, we expect to have a strong draft of high-capacity transit corridors by the end of the year. And during 2021, we will develop strategies for regional mobility centers, cross-system coordination, and set the framework for TDM, transportation demand management, and local land use policy. Not to mention, we anticipate this work will set ourselves up for very well-informed and all-important governance and funding discussions. So before I turn things over and turn our attention to regional corridors, some highlights of what members of the Policy Advisory Committee can anticipate. We're currently at meeting 2. Based on inputs received already and upcoming, we will come back to you on January 13th, 2021, to share with you how we arrived at the preferred corridors and forecast how both high priority and visionary corridors will be integrated into the overall project. You'll hear more about those in a moment. As you'll also see, we will continue to bring the Policy Advisory Committee together to discuss several important topics throughout 2021, and in parallel and coordination with the Technical and Community Advisory Committees, over this same period. We expect this to culminate in a regional transit vision ready for implementation by next fall. Of course, there'll be a lot of other touch points, communication in between, but wanted to give you this forecast of what's coming. This is an aggressive schedule, but we have heard loud and clear that this is the time and it's time to move quickly. So now I would like to turn things over to Jorge Luna, Project Manager for Connect Beyond, Lead Consultant, HDR. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Jorge Luna. I am the Project Manager for Connect Beyond on behalf of HDR, supporting the overall project team. Thanks, Jason. Thank you very much. And thanks to everyone for the opportunity to be here. So next slide, please. I'll be covering the overall total mobility network as it applies to the Connect Beyond project and pivot from that into the conversation of candidate high capacity transit corridors that we have before you today. Real quick, in terms of what do we mean about the total mobility network? Mobility means a little bit different for everyone. As Jason noted, our region is growing and growing fast. And as the region grows, additional mobility options will be needed to get about our daily lives, to get to work, school, go to daily activities, visit a friend, go shopping, whatever the case may be. We just, as the region grows, we have 2.6 million people now, and we'll be definitely growing come by 2045. So this is the great opportunity to set a vision to continue moving the transit and mobility needle. And as you all know, mobility varies, if you will, across our region. At the center of our region, you have several options, but as you radiate further away from the region, mobility options get fewer and fewer. So what Connect Beyond is aiming to do is to achieve a bold vision of the right mobility options that can empower our region to continue to grow. Next slide, please. So how is Connect Beyond planning to do this? We have our planning process, and this is a 4-step process, and 18 months worth of a lot of work boiled down into four key points, if you will. But there's a lot happening in this process here. Jason briefly noted it previously, but our first step is to evaluate the transit system, looking at the existing services and looking at future plans. We're looking at gigabytes and gigabytes of data of current population, projected population, employment growth, where people are traveling, coming to, going from, adopted transit and transportation plans. We've been looking at all that rich data to be able to inform us. The second step in the process to identify the candidate high capacity transit corridors and refine those from candidate corridors to eventually preferred corridors. So this is the process that we're going through right now, and we would appreciate, again, your feedback, and that's what we're looking for from all stakeholders and also of course, from you all. From the high capacity transit corridors, we then pivot into the existing we would then pivot into envisioning a total mobility network for the region. What are services and opportunities to feed, if you will, these high capacity transit corridors? What mobility options, what other items can we imagine and be able to feed the high capacity transit corridors, and not only feed them, but at the same time, feed the network itself, maybe bus to bus transfers, additional mobility options, and just be able to think big in terms of how we reimagine, if you will, mobility or define mobility in our region. At the last step, step 4, the purpose is to develop implementation strategies that support area municipalities, planning organizations. What is the toolkit or the playbook, as Jason likes to refer to it, that the region would then be able to reference and be able to continue to move this vision forward? We have the great big vision for the entire region, but then how does the individual areas continue this conversation forward? And that's part of the playbook. Next slide, please. And from the 4 steps, this is just a brief layers of mobility graphic that we wanted to share. And this is to see the thinking behind the project team and what we're planning on doing, which is we're identifying right now high capacity transit corridors from candidate to eventually preferred. And then we'll be moving into other layers of mobility, such as local bus. How can local bus connect to these high capacity transit services? Maybe how can neighborhood circulators or shuttles connect to those lines that are connecting to high capacity transit corridors and connect amongst themselves at the same time? It's not only feeding the high capacity transit corridors, but providing mobility to the community at the same time. After we look at fixed route services and identifying that layer, we would then be looking at additional mobility needs in terms of paratransit service, demand response services, those areas that may be required, are required by law, at least to ensure that we have some service surrounding. And we keep that in mind. It's not an afterthought that mobility means many different things, especially for Americans with Disabilities Act, that we keep that in mind when we're identifying our overall network. Beyond that, we have these TDM, or Transportation Demand Management strategies, that we'd be looking at. The region already does TDM, but can we think regionally in terms of the 12 counties and 2 states? Transportation demand management strategies such as van pool, walk to work, bike to work, carpooling, also looking at mobility hubs, emerging technologies. So that's part of a subsequent layer. And last, we'd be doing these implementation strategies, the playbook that we want to be able to identify and make sure that we have short-term impactful opportunities to move forward, or strategies, and at the same time, long-term opportunities, the implementation of these high-capacity transit corridors that do take a while to be able to come into existence. Next slide, please. Just as a reminder, we are talking today, there's different layers of mobility, but today we're talking about high-capacity transit, and it means many different things, if you will. For high-capacity transit, there's light rail, bus rapid transit, arterial or freeway-based rapid transit, commuter rail. So today is mainly that conversation of the corridor, not identifying the mode. At this point, we're not saying it's going to be a particular mode. We're just saying that the corridor is high-capacity transit, and there's additional work to be done to identify what mode is the best fit for that particular corridor. Next slide, please. How are we doing this? Right now, we're in a 7-step process, and we're at step 2, where we've taken a lot of information, boiled it down, and being able to make sense of these candidate corridors that we are having conversations about and refining. And once we identify the candidate corridors, we'll identify preferred corridors, and then from there, those preferred corridors, we'll start building the additional layers of mobility to feed and maximize the investment on high-capacity transit corridors for the region. Next slide, please. One piece of information that I wanted to share with you all that we looked at, we have traffic analysis zones in the region, and it's a model that looks at where trips are happening right now, currently, and then at the same time in the future, 2040 and beyond. 2045, I think the model we had for the Charlotte Greater Charlotte area. And we're identifying trips, and to help us understand it as a piece of information where trips are happening not only between market areas, between these areas within our 12 county study area, but at the same time, are people staying within their own market area, and are their mobility needs being met internally within their market area? So it was a piece of information that we looked at. It's very informative, and it helps, if you will, see strengths between one market area, and that's the thicker and the redder the line means that many more trips that are happening, projected to happen between those market areas. So that was a piece of information. Next slide, please. We also looked at a lot of good information in terms of transit propensity. So we looked at youth population. In this case, we developed an index layered from youth, elderly, minority concentrations, low income, disabled, and zero vehicle households. So this slide right here is low income. Now this is disabled population that we looked at. We also looked at zero car households. And I think at the end, we compiled them all and created a transit propensity index. The key for the TPI is it's very current data. It's based on the American Community Survey, and it's a piece of information that helps guide our equity lens, where are people that need transit most, and how can we will incorporate that when we're refining the corridors and continue doing the analysis process. But that's just another piece of information to share. Next slide, please. So with that, we have these candidate high-capacity transit corridors. Next slide, please, that we've identified so far. And this is the greater region. What you see on your screen right now is the candidate corridors that we've identified. Blue, the stronger blue, if you will, is candidate commuter rail corridors. And then underneath sort of a light blue to green are candidate high-capacity transit corridors that could be bus rapid transit, light rail, other modes, express bus service, for example. But we're building off of the 2030 system plan, as well as other plans that have been identified in the region for service. Next slide, please. So this is the great, sort of the snapshot out there, but we're looking at now at Mecklenburg, the CRTPO Iredell Union area, CRTPO planning area. You see some of the recommended, candidate high-capacity transit corridors right now that we continue analyzing. We're building off of commuter rail, sort of radiating from the center of Uptown up towards Rowan, Lincoln, towards York County in South Carolina, Union, as well as additional high capacity transit services as extensions of the 2030 system plan. That's very, very important. Next slide, please. We then look at Cabarrus and Rowan, and we were able to work with the staff from the area. And thank you very much for the input. And we've been identifying in extensions of commuter rail through Cabarrus and into Rowan and ending up in Salisbury with east-west connectors in the area as well, and connecting Concord Mills Mall, as well as from an extension from the 2030 system plan. Next slide, please. In addition to that, we've of course been working with Gaston, Cleveland, and Lincoln counties and the MPO there. We've identified some commuter rail options based on previous work that has been that is being done in the area, as well as through the CATS 2030 system plan. And we identified some areas of growth, so for example, in the corridor there on into Lincoln and Lincolnville, to be able to connect those areas with some sort of high capacity transit service, as well as Shelby in the Shelby area, and north-south on 321, which is very interesting. Next slide, please. And then we also have Anson and Stanley in East Union County. We looked at some connecting service up towards Albemarle, and as well as ending in Anson, some high capacity transit services as rounding out the network in the eastern part of the county. Next slide, please. And we also have East York and North Lancaster counties. We've identified some candidate corridors for high capacity transit, as well as some service on 77, as well as 21, and connecting towards Tega Cay in the Lake Wiley area, as well as some service in Lancaster to be able to connect on down there and 521 in that area. Next slide, please. So we've been doing a lot of we've been having a lot of conversations. We've been engaging a lot of folks, and the blue dots that you see on your screen with the white circles, as well as the thick blue lines, are comments that we've been gathering, and we've been going around the conversations with the MPOs, stakeholders, mobility management group from Centralina. There's been a lot of feedback, and every time we're refining and getting that feedback, we put a push pin, if you will, on the map and be sure to bring that back so we can continue refining these corridors. So that's what we've heard so far. But it's important that to note that everyone we've been talking to is looking forward to this vision of mobility that allows an individual to crisscross the region, maybe one seat ride, and have access to additional growth and employment and attractions and services across our great region. Next slide, please. So this is just a brief overview of the work that has been done to date for identifying these candidate high capacity transit corridors. And keep in mind that there's other pieces of information, other tasks in the Connect Beyond effort that are the other subsequent layers for high capacity transit in terms of local bus service, TDM strategies, demand responsive service. But this is the first layer. And maybe there's some reactions. I don't know, Sabrina, if you want to moderate, or if there's a question or comment on the chat box. But we just wanted to get a little bit of just a reaction from this.
So we encourage everyone to put comments in, or any questions that you may have. There aren't currently any in the chat just yet.
And as maybe comments are coming in or questions, if somebody raises their hand, also realize you may be on mute in case you want to ask a question or leave something in the chat. But in addition to that, to the work that these candidate corridors, the next step is refining them based on the feedback that we received, and then categorizing them, if you will, in terms of high priority corridors that are currently maybe in the works of being planned, implemented, and being worked on and seeking federal funds. And then at the same time, so there's the high priority, and then we also would identify visionary corridors that we could develop strategies around to make sure that we're preparing the area to be able to work and receive and complement, between land uses and vision of space for high capacity transit in the area, as well as proper land uses and services and connectivities for the future.
So we do have a couple things in the chat now. So one, so excellent vision and addresses the future needs and not yet obvious today, but will be 20, 30 years from now. They're pleased that the commuter rail is being studied to bring in Rowan and Cabarrus County. So thank you, Dr. Spalding. Another question, could we share the recurring themes we have been hearing from the community with regards to the high capacity transit corridors and preferred modes?
Absolutely. So that is all really good questions and points. Thank you for that, Dr. Spalding. Taiwo, absolutely. Yeah, we have the comments that we've been receiving and gathering. We're going into a public input process as well, these candidate corridors. We're happy to share that information. We also have a story map in terms of how we've been gathering data and telling a story, if you will, on the journey of identifying the candidate corridors, and all the comments received so far from all the stakeholders that we have. There's a lot of good information out there. We welcome everyone to be able to access it. We've also placed the information for the disposal of your everyone at the various agencies to look at and peruse, and maybe it's of use for other projects. So we're definitely happy to share all that information.
Okay. So another question from Anthony Farrow. So are we considering the Link Silver Line extending into Gastonia and beyond?
That, Ms. Farrow, that's a really great question. One of the things, if you see on your screen right now, we have an east-west west to southeast-ish purple line, and that's sort of the silver line from the 2030 system plan. We have identified an extension to that, a high-capacity transit corridor extension. As a candidate corridor for subsequent analysis, it has been identified. We do see really strong travel patterns further west, and then even connecting to like Kings Mountain and out into Shelby. So there are some travel patterns. There is growth projected in that area. And as I said, right now, we're looking at the corridor, identifying that high capacity transit corridor, and then eventually, as more work happens through the planning process outside of Connect Beyond, there would be a discussion of what's the right mode that fits within that corridor.
So another question in from Alberto with Charlotte Planning. Will the travel demand models be modified in the future based on the impact the pandemic has had on lower demand for commuting to office centers?
That is a really good question. And I wish I could tell you with all certainty that it's going to happen. Or what will it change like? I know that the models get updated frequently based on inputs such as streetlight data, for example, the information that is able to feed the model. The model is updated based on existing transit service and transit usage. So there's various components of the model. And right now it's too early to tell in terms of what will this mean in terms of overall impact to the model in the number of trips. But that is why we're looking as part of this effort of Connect Beyond in transportation demand management strategies, because it is important not only to show high capacity transit service, but at the same time, can we add additional mobility options like identify ways at a mobility hub that folks could bike to a particular place, be able to board transit or have carpool incentives or different ways that are not necessarily just tied to a fixed route bus or a light rail or other modes. So it's early to tell. Even FTA, they're coming to terms with what would that model mean in terms of going forward, and how do you rate projects based on ridership and projection. So it is still an unknown, but we are definitely looking at it and looking at it closely. So I don't know if JL or Kevin, if they, Jason Lawrence or Kevin, if you wanted to add anything else.
I would just add, this is Kevin. We've been working with the updated working model, if you will, through CDOT, and also the state's model as well. So we're trying to use the most recent and updated information. But that's a very good point. I appreciate the comment.
No, thank you, Kevin and Jorge. You all answered that very well.
Thank you.
Got a couple more questions in the chat that we can ask. So Another one that came in, so it looks like great regional work. I'm pleased to see the addition of environmental and equity concerns in the layering. So are we also looking at the impact on community character of these small towns and communities? It can be both and that was from Autumn Michael.
Great question. And that is one of the pieces of work that we'll be doing as a subsequent task for this effort are strategies for identifying or complementing the high capacity transit corridor. So we have to keep in mind the sensitivity of a community in terms of maybe the right of way. Right now, it's too early to tell. We're identifying the corridors, and it's very important for me to stress that there is more work eventually that needs to be done in terms of in this swath of 1 mile that we've identified, where is the right place to thread the needle, thread that high capacity transit corridor and not negatively impact communities, make sure that it is a point of pride, a point of value for communities. And that's why we're trying to do this work right now, identifying the big picture that allows these corridors to get support and strength behind them. But then there's more work that needs to be done in engaging more local communities and making sure that that they're being listened to. And it is again a point of pride, a point of additional mobility options, not only for jobs but for education. What will these corridors do in terms of opening opportunities for the region? So that's one of the things that we are keeping in mind. And at this level, imagine we're at maybe 30,000 foot level. We want to identify the corridors, but we also want to identify strategies. And that's one very important item that we will be noting in the strategies to make sure that communities are, this is a maximum value for communities and not negatively impacting them.
So we have a couple more questions in the chat, and I think we've got some that have come in on the YouTube Live as well. I think we're going to answer all questions, but for the sake of time, we're going to jump to the next section for our panel discussion, and then we will circle back and answer more questions at our next block. So if you've asked a question in the chat, we will definitely get to it.
Thank you, Jorge, for that excellent presentation. Now we're going to take a walk through how we get the results of this study in the hands of our partners, really thinking about vision to implementation, turning the Connect Beyond vision into actionable steps that make this a reality. Right now, we're setting the vision, but there will be many organizations that will participate in implementation, including many of the organizations that you as elected officials and regional leaders are part of, or perhaps you lead these organizations, including the MPOs, the Metropolitan Planning Organizations, rural planning organizations, the transit system providers that we have throughout the region, local and state agencies, whether it's DOTs or local governments, and then of course, the Metropolitan Transit Commission and the Centralina Regional Council. So with that, I would like to invite our panel of experts to talk through how we can realistically work together as a region to achieve this vision. If you will please turn your video on when I call your name. First, we've got John Lewis. John is currently the Chief Executive Officer of the Charlotte Area Transit System. And during his tenure at CATS, he has overseen construction of the Lynx Blue Line, which you've heard some about today, and advanced the City Lynx Gold Line Phase 2 streetcar project through final design and into construction. Welcome, John. We also have Tony Lathrop. He's a member of the North Carolina Board of Transportation, representing Division 10, which is comprised of Anson, Cabarrus, Mecklenburg, and Stanley and Union counties. And he serves as the chairman of the board's Funding and Appropriations Strategies Committee as well. Welcome, Tony.
Thank you, Michelle.
We also have Pat Mumford. He serves as the executive director for the Greater Gaston Development Corporation. This is a newly formed corporation, which is a combo that was formed to strengthen Gaston County's economic competitiveness and increase capital investment and sustainable job development within Gaston County. Welcome, Pat.
Thank you, Michelle.
And we also have with us Concord Mayor Bill Dusch. He served as mayor since December of 27, but he's been involved with civil service for over 30 years. He has served on Concord's Planning and Zoning Commission, the Board of Adjustment, and the Historic Preservation Commission. So a very thorough knowledge of that community for sure. Welcome, Mayor.
Glad to be here today.
Great. So for our participants on the call today, feel free to put any questions you have for the panel into the chat box as we go. We're going to have a Q&A session after the discussion with former Mayor Harvey Gantt. So we want to make sure we go ahead and get those in as they come to your mind. So it looks like we've got all the panelists with our videos on. We're going to jump right in with a question for John Lewis. John, the CATS 2030 system plan has served as the foundation for the candidate high-capacity transit corridors that are being developed through Connect Beyond. Can you talk a little bit about the importance of developing these corridors as a building block for a regional transit system?
Thank you, Michelle, and thanks to everyone who's joining us this afternoon, this morning, and my fellow panelists. I'm really excited about the opportunity that Connect Beyond provides us to lay out a roadmap or groundwork for regional transportation. This region has been very focused on providing mobility options for the last several decades. I think when you look at it, whether it was intentional or not, the groundwork was laid with the CATS 2030 plan. And this work began in the late 90s, culminating in the sales tax initiative in Mecklenburg County that allowed us to begin laying the groundwork and move into implementation of high capacity corridors. The South Corridor of the Blue Line opened in 2007. As a result of this effort, we constructed and opened the North Corridor of the Blue Line extension, 9.5 miles and 11 stations of additional light rail, opened in March of 2018. During the same time, we've opened the Gold Line, 2.5 miles of streetcar in 2015, and are in the process of finishing construction for another 2.5 mile extension of that. And so as we are building that core area of high capacity transit, the question begins, how do we connect to our regional partners so that we can provide the level of mobility options to everyone in the region, no matter what their trip needs or mobility needs are. And this is not about necessarily about choosing one mode over another, but providing a wide array of options that support the quality of life that this region has been so famous for throughout this wider community. And so this effort, as we're moving forward with the Silver Line design and to the point of finishing the 2030 plan, the next natural step is to figure out how do we broaden that beyond just Mecklenburg County? How do we meet the commuting and mobility needs of our regional partners who are also important, very important to the growth and economic well-being of our community?
Thank you, John. Really appreciate that overview, and certainly the 2030 plan serves as a great base, and we look forward to getting hopefully all of that done by 2030 so we can expand into the vision of Connect Beyond. So this next question is for Tony. Tony, you know, as a DOT board member and your look from a statewide perspective, we've been speaking about a big picture vision, but how does this really get done?
Well, let me first say thanks. I want to thank Michelle, you and your team for all that you've done to so far in Connect Beyond and to put this together. And I want to echo what Mayor Compton and Commissioner Harden said at the outset about our common interests. And I'm passionate about that. And I've been speaking and spreading the word about collaboration for the past 3.5 years since I've been on the board. And I love visiting with folks around this region. So, you know, please let me know. I would love to come and meet with you all and speak with you about this. I think well, let me just say that my role is as chair of the finance committee at NCDOT, and I'm also on the NC First task force looking at the revenue model. And I think that working together is so important in the finance aspect of paying for all of this, and that's what I'm focused on. But I think generally, before we start talking about specific finance, that we have to be able to, as a region, develop the relationships with each other and the awareness of all of our regional needs, and so that we can educate ourselves about that. And third, so that we can reach consensus on all the things that we need to do, so that then we can work together. Fourth, to advocate for those, and then fifth, to make them a reality. So, how does that translate into my world? To get to your question, it's challenging anytime to drill down and get things funded, even more so these days. But my focus is on the STI process with NCDOT, and it's so important, as we're scoring projects and prioritizing projects, for us to collaborate in this region on consensus for the right projects, the projects that are right for us and for our region, since we have, we just can't do every single project, and focus on the ones that are going to be able to score well. And then, so that's really the first thing, to collaborate in our MPOs and otherwise, because, as as many of you know, STI has 3 tiers of projects, and statewide, regional, and divisional. And the regional projects get 30% of the points from division and MPOs. So 15% from MPO RPOs and 15% from the divisions. And then down at the division level, that goes up to 50%, and it's 25% and 25%. So it's critical to have consensus on what you want to do to get those points assigned in a way that's consistent with your priorities. And so collaboration is just crucial with that. And then finally, I would say third, just really do tell me what priorities are. I mean, they're scored and they come in, but I would say that it just cannot hurt for me to know, for the division engineers to know, just to hear from you about what the priorities are. And so, I think that we have to continue to collaborate as a region, but in my domain at NCDOT, those are some specifics that we can do collaboratively.
Thank you, Tony. That makes so much sense. And one of the key components of this document, even though it is a vision, is key action steps, things that we can do in the short term that can get inputted into the MPO's processes and work their way through the prioritization to actually get projects on the ground. So thank you for that overview. So our next question is for Pat. Pat, across the region, we're all competing for resources and jobs. You see that every day in your work. But when we work together on transportation infrastructure, it really has the impact of raising all boats. What are some of the greatest transit opportunities from your perspective that might increase your ability to attract and retain businesses in Gaston County?
Well, thank you for that question, Michelle. I want to go back to a point Jorge made briefly, just that transit planning is clearly not limited to just efficiently moving people from point A to point B. And what I see as a great opportunity for us is the long-term economic growth and viability can be elevated through the importance of land use planning and placemaking when making transit alignment and station design decisions. So what I'm seeing in Gaston County is, I'm guessing is across the region, that quality of life variables are really influencing business and residential location decisions today. And how we align streets and trails and sidewalks and bike paths and connect them to transit to create a sense of place is going to continue to be incredibly important in driving economic development. We want to create well-connected, place-driven communities, and that will be essential to keeping us competitive as a region. I was really pleased to see there's a slide in the very beginning of this discussion. It was a picture from about a century ago of the opening of the Wilkinson Bridge across the Catawba River. And for me, given the size of the group that was gathered, it appeared to be clear that there's enthusiasm for that important transportation investment and the resulting potential that it had for both Gaston and Mecklenburg counties at the time. So if you fast forward to today, I'm hearing of proposed projects. I had a conversation just earlier this week with somebody in eastern Gaston County that's taking into consideration the future Silver Line extension into Belmont, which will cross the river at that exact location. And the project's focusing on leveraging that transit opportunity and the unique characteristics of these organically grown century-old cities and towns in eastern Gaston County to attract residents and businesses. And they're being really deliberate about retaining the small town charm of these communities while working to really efficiently connect people regionally through the transit options. So it's a bit of a dance to balance both of those, but they're really looking forward a decade out and planning for that transit to be there, which I think is phenomenal from a land use standpoint. So the Connect Beyond project provides us with the needed research and upfront planning so we can apply that intentionally on the ground as we prepare our communities for the next century. And I really appreciate the great work being done by the project and leadership teams on this important effort.
Thank you, Pat. It's so important to be thinking about transportation and land use in conjunction. And often our systems put those two important concepts in silos, but we've got to do a better job there. And that's one of the things that is really a primary goal of Connect Beyond, is to be thinking about both of those important things in concert. So thank you. The next question is back to John Lewis. And really, in thinking about the COVID-19 pandemic, it's really had an impact on transit systems across the country. What do you think is important to keep the momentum in place related to transit, and why? Why is it still important to be thinking about the future of transit?
Well, I think we are taking the COVID-19 pandemic as not a diversion of the path that we're taking, but sort of a speed bump in the middle of the road. We were all taken aback by the impact of this health crisis as it began to shut down our cities, shut down our communities, and force people to work in a different way. But one thing that we've seen, typical on a typical weekday before the pandemic hit, CATS would move somewhere between 70 and 75,000 people Monday through Friday daily. And then once the pandemic hit, the ridership dropped significantly as people were dealing with the changes in their community, the changes to their work patterns, the uncertainty surrounding the transmission of the virus itself. And so our ridership dropped almost 80% the very next day. But then as the reality of having to continue with economic activity, the ridership continued to move forward. And so if you are an individual who may or may not have access to a vehicle, may have a vehicle in your household, but maybe one individual uses it while another makes utilization of transit. But our ridership has continued to grow as people have continued to try and get back into the new norm of day-to-day business despite the pandemic. And so we're almost, from a bus standpoint, back up to about 50% of our ridership. Still a significant change. But I think what we are focused on right now is to continue our long-term vision of providing a top-notch world-class mobility network to our region, but doing so in a smart and safe way. And so we have invested a lot of time and energy in ensuring that our vehicles, our trains are clean, and we have a third-party contractor who's come in and is in the process of certifying our cleaning methods. And so it's about consumer confidence at some point in the short term, that once these patterns come back to whatever the new norm is, that CATS is ready to meet those demands from a mobility standpoint. Now, what that new norm will look like, who knows? Will it be exactly like it was prior to March of this year? Or will it be a little bit different, or will it be drastically different? But no matter what the outcome from that standpoint will be, we're making sure that we will be nimble enough to meet those needs in the immediate future while we continue to plan for the obvious needs that have been laid out in this discussion today for the long-term viability, mobility options in this community. Thank you.
Thank you. So we're going to actually go to the chat to see if there's any questions of our panelists. And while we're pulling those together, let me just ask one more thing of Tony. Tony, from the NCDOT perspective, I was just curious, have you seen any examples of where regional collaboration, working together across community boundaries, across system boundaries, has actually benefited communities in terms of getting funding either at the state or federal level?
Well, I'd start right here with the blue line and the way we were able to leverage our local revenues to partner with the state and federal governments to fund that project. And I think there are many others, but that started with collaboration. And, there are others, projects that go across counties or go through different towns or around different towns require a lot of collaboration, like the Monroe Bypass. And, again, I focus on creative finance and the need for us as a region to collaborate on ways to finance these projects. There are creative ways, and recently we've been looking at peer states, and I'm starting to consider Virginia, Florida, and Texas as doing things that we need to look at more to creatively finance. And when I say finance, I just don't mean pay as you go. I mean find ways to creatively, and I see Mike Miltich, Dr. Mike just put up a comment on that. I'm not talking about just funding, but rather what you do with the funds to finance these things, because you can, simplistically, you can turn $10 into $100, $10 in seed money into 100 with a combination of federal loans, different grants, private activity bonds, different kinds of borrowing and whatnot, to come up with an extremely sustainable way to pay for things. In other words, you can service that debt. It's just like buying a house. You pay your mortgage so that you can have the asset now. And I think it's critical for us as a region to look really hard at all the creative ways to leverage our revenue streams, because that can really set us apart from other places. Thanks for that question, Michelle.
Thank you. And so now let's turn to Mayor Dusch. when you think about, up in Concord and the growth that you're seeing, we know that some of the recommendations stemming from this project will take several years to complete. And it may be hard for some residents to visualize that in terms of, even a few years out in the future. But when we're talking about, a decade or two, it's a little bit hard for them to see, especially in a time when they've got so many other things on their mind and other priorities are capturing their attention. Can you point to some specific initiatives in Concord or even in Cabarrus County, either past or present, where the long game really has paid off?
There's so much activity going on up here. First of all, having the Rider Transit Center, a system already in place here in Concord, Kannapolis, and Cabarrus County, puts us in sort of a unique situation where we've had this for many years. We just did our 20-year plan with that, our strategic plan. We just approved that in the last several months. And the goal is to serve further into our communities and to interconnect better with the Charlotte system. Some of the growth that's going on here, the grounds at Concord, the old Philip Morris facility, that's 2,100 industrial acres that is on US 29, about 7 miles from the J.W. Clay light rail station. And we see the importance of having either light rail or bus rapid transit coming from J.W. Clay to that facility. We have Concord Pageant Regional Airport, which is the 7th busiest airport in the state. We need to interconnect that with our system as well as with the Charlotte system. Everything we're doing is, our growth between Concord, Kannapolis, and Charlotte is just phenomenal. Concord itself is population is now 100,000. So you can imagine from a sleepy town from 30 years ago to this and watching it just grow like crazy. It is putting a lot of stress on us, but we're working hard to be part of the solution as it's going forward. The other thing we're doing, Pat Mumford talked about various ways to interconnect, including trails, and we're working hard with the Carolina Thread Trail to interconnect between, again, the different communities. We're building a leg right now between Kannapolis and Concord. Eventually, there's over 150 miles of trails interconnecting with our systems. And that's where it becomes important to do that interconnection with your bus system, with your rapid transit system. From a standpoint of, will the citizens wait for it? Well, we have to do this. This has just becomes an important part of our community. And a lot of times we have to have the vision and stand behind what we're doing and make it happen. And then the citizens will look at it and say, wow, I'm glad you guys did that. And that's what we're working hard on right now.
Yes, well, thank you so much for that insight. Having been up there for 30 years and been in civil service and being so involved in the community, I know that your residents and citizens expect a lot from you because they've seen a lot from you. So thank you for your service to the community.
Thank you.
And with that, thank you for all of our panelists. We're going to invite questions from the participants today, but we'd like to first welcome Geraldine Gardner, Executive Director of Centralina Council, and then we're going to have the conversation with former Mayor Gantt, and then we will invite the questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Michelle. I'm delighted to be here this morning with all of you to be a part of this second policy committee meeting and to have a really important conversation with the former mayor of Charlotte, the Honorable Harvey Gantt. I know he is known to all of you on the phone and to those of you listening in for his leadership of the city of Charlotte, his work as an acclaimed architect whose designs have made an indelible impression on the skyline and the fabric of our community. And in the interest of time, I'm not going to read his bio to you, but would invite my colleagues to put some key points about his background in the chat. Mayor, are you here with me? There you are. Maybe you can unmute yourself and we can start our conversation. There you are. Great. So thank you for joining us today, Mr. Mayor. We really appreciate your insights as a leader in our community and a leader in this region. And I want to dive right into our conversation today because I know we only have you for a limited time. And you know, you've been a part of this community for decades. You've seen the growth that Jason talked about in his opening slides and presentations. You've had a front seat to that growth. You've helped to shape it in the city of Charlotte. But today we face a range of really critical challenges that have been raised during today's discussion, from the pandemic recovery and ongoing challenges with inequalities in our community. Some might say this isn't the right time to do this type of visionary planning work, but you're a visionary person. And I want to hear, in your opinion, why is this conversation and this initiative around regional mobility so important right now for our region?
Well, thank you a lot, Geraldine, for allowing me to be a part of this program. And let me just tell you that I've been tuned into this discussion for now about 45 minutes, and I've been very, very impressed with Connect Beyond and all of the participants in the program up to this time. When Mayor Lyles appointed me as chairperson of the Charlotte Moves Task Force, one of the questions that always lingered in my mind was this whole issue of the fact that Charlotte and the political boundaries defined in this region cannot compete with the fact that we live in a region that has been growing by leaps and bounds. And even if we did substantially good work on this task force and moved forward with the charge she had given us, my concern was always going to be, what are we doing around Charlotte in the region? And then, of course, I became aware of what you are doing, Geraldine, and all the other people and actors that are involved in regional efforts. The timing is right because, first of all, the region is growing. I would almost say exponentially. I thought back to the time when I was mayor of Charlotte back in the early 80s. The population of Charlotte was around 400,000 people. 40 years later, it's doubled that size. And I should probably say that a considerable amount of additional growth, in fact, I know, has occurred in the region. So we've got to find a way to make sure that it becomes a viable quality of life place to be. And the best places in the country are those that are receptive to new industries coming in, those that connect people very well, and connecting those people to jobs, commerce, recreation, and so forth and so on. And you all have talked about that in great substance up to now in this meeting. I actually believe that we have to deal with these kinds of things and to make the region more viable for people to live in, for industries and others to come into this area. And mobility is at the center of that effort. How we connect Charlotte with Rock Hill, with Concord, with Gastonia. Those were things that bothered me. How we pay for it. How much preparation are we doing? Is Charlotte operating in isolation of the surrounding counties and the region? So those were concerns I had, but I'll tell you, listening to the discussion up to this point, I'm really encouraged that people have got their eyes open and listening closely and operating in the area that I'm most concerned about, connectivity. How do we connect each other? We will have some challenging issues before us as we go forward. You point out that we're operating in a pandemic. I pointed out that how do we go to the community and talk about underwriting the blue line, the silver line, and the other kinds of initiatives John Lewis has talked about in his 2030 plan. How do we do that in a time when people are literally concerned about their jobs? How do we do that if we have to talk about increased taxes? So while those things would seem to be problematic, the fact is that if we are not addressing mobility, if we're not addressing how we connect as a region, we will find ourselves in a period where those population growths cited over the last 40 years will start to diminish because the region will not be as viable. So it's a good time to deal with this.
You brought up some really important points there, and I want to come back to the Charlotte Moves Task Force, but I know something that's on my mind this morning is in hearing Tony Lathrop talk about this on his comments in the panel. You know, we're in a very divisive moment in our society, in our country right now, where it's really hard to find common ground. It's really hard to find the points of connection. And Tony made a comment on the panel right now about reaching consensus and understanding needs and being able to advocate together as a region. Do you think that mobility is that topic that can create a bridge between people from different backgrounds, with different needs, with different perspectives on mobility and how we pay for it? Is this the issue that could bring our region together, or is it something else? What's your thought on that?
Well, if we go about it in the right way, Geraldine, yes, this is something that can bring us together. The very notion that we are talking about greater connectivity makes some sense. If I can go into marginal neighborhoods and show them how building the right transit system will connect them to jobs in a relatively short period of time, that is a benefit. That is an opportunity to allow people an opportunity for economic mobility. So if we do the right kind of engagement as we prepare these plans, people will recognize immediately some of the benefits that may occur. If I can connect poor people to jobs, if we can connect educational institutions so that people have an opportunity to get to those and improve their lives, that's going to be good for the region and good for people connecting to each other. But one of the things that always is important to me is how we engage the community, even as we plan these systems. They have to see their future. They have to see the kitchen table issues that they are concerned about reflected in the plans for connecting the region. If they can't see it, then I think we have a problem. They will never, if they can't see what that future is going to look like, they're going to have some real issues.
Yeah, and also for, I think, our responsibility as an organization and being part of this committee, all of our elected officials and technical experts that are joining us on the call today, it's about understanding what those talking points are and knowing that we have different audiences and different messages that are going to reach different people for different reasons. So how would you make the case to someone who might be in Iredell County or living in Salisbury or in Rock Hill? What would be that message to them about why should they care about being connected in a regional system, even if that connection might not be something that they themselves in the next even 10 or 20 years can benefit from, but maybe their children? What would you focus on, and what should we focus on in our engagement to make that case?
It's a good question. What occurred to me first is that there are about 250,000 people in Charlotte that do not drive a car. 80 to 85% of the way we move around Charlotte is by single occupancy vehicles. A system that in the future, even if it's 10 to 15 years out, that would say, I'm going to increase the activity sphere for a lot of people who now have no access to an automobile, is shining a ray of light to the mobility that those people may have to get to a lot of different things. If I live in Cabarrus County and I've got to find a job that might have located on the edge of Charlotte, I need to be able to get there. If I've got a relative, an aunt or an uncle or a grandparent that lives in Anson County, I need to have a way to get there reasonably easy without using a car. I also need to understand that we can't continue with 80 to 90% of the people moving in the region through single occupancy vehicles. The damage it does to the environment and all of the other things associated with that is not acceptable, cannot be acceptable in the world and the climate and the region that we want to have in the years ahead. There are lots of ways we can look at increasing the activity sphere of people that then brings them opportunities. And we've got to make that case and make it clearly to whether you lived in a small town in the region or whether you lived in the heart of Charlotte, why it's important that all of us be able to move around.
Yeah, and you come back to that point that it could be the through line that brings us all together. We all have to move around. We want to do that safely, and we want to have great choices to be able to do that and connect us to different destinations. I want to come back to the Charlotte Moves Task Force. You are chairing that committee, that task force. I have the honor of being able to be a part of that. It's been a really dynamic and enjoyable process so far. And you're charged with helping our group move towards understanding this idea of a transformational mobility network for the city. And you've pointed out in your remarks today the importance of connecting the dots between that effort and what we're doing here with Connect Beyond. So I wanted to ask you, what do you think are the issues or the topics that are most closely aligned or complementary between these two efforts that we need to really closely coordinate on as we move both of the regional work here at Connect Beyond and the work focused on Charlotte? What are those issues that are top of mind to you for coordination?
Well, first of all, the transformational network, in my opinion, talks about, again, this word I'm overusing, but connectivity and the ability of people to move in all modes of transportation, and maybe even to adjust the ratios that we've gotten, we've seen to the state. To make that happen, we've got to be making improvements, not only in automobile traffic and the use of that mode, but improvements in transit, bicycles, pedestrian paths, greenways, whatever we want to, any mode that we can think of. And we need to have those all updated and moving forward over the next 20 years to cause that to happen. And if we do that, we need to be thinking big. We need to be thinking not in small stages. Even if we have to develop it incrementally, we need to see this thing in its totality, because I think that's how you ultimately sell it to the region, to the citizens who are going to benefit from it. And one of the things that I appreciate the mayor doing when she set up this task force that I chair is that she recognized the importance of regionality here. So you, Geraldine, are a member of the task force, as you know, and Janet Labar of the Charlotte Business Regional Alliance, the Charlotte Regional Alliance is a part of that task force, and Reggie Henderson, for example, a vice president over at Lowe's, is a part of your Connect Beyond Advisory Committee. We need to be interconnected as we move forward to build connectivity. And I'm just appreciative of the fact that I don't think Charlotte can move forward and do this without the folks in Gastonia, the folks in Concord, and the others taking a hard look at the things that they need to be doing to make sure that everybody's pushing in the same direction.
I was talking with a former colleague of mine who's now based in Atlanta and sort of sharing with her some of the things that we're doing through this project. And she was a little jealous, actually. She said, you know, we've been trying to get people in Atlanta regionally together to talk about mobility for a long time, and it's hard work. And I know there were a number of peer city regions and peer city presentations that were given to the Charlotte Moves Task Force. I think it was in our July meeting. Who are you looking at? What other communities are you looking at as models that we should aspire to pull lessons learned from their experience of trying to bring regional stakeholders together to really move the needle on mobility?
Well, we've been looking at a lot of cities. We actually studied 3, but you know, in the last meeting, I was asking folks on the task force, who do they think had the best transportation system in their region? Lots of people talked about the cities in the Northwest, Seattle and Portland, and cities in the Midwest, Denver. But we actually studied 3 cities that are close to us in size, in land area, and population mix. Those 3 cities were Austin, Texas, Broward County, Florida, and Nashville. And there were 3 things that I think we studied. We had case study presentations made to us. And I think we came away with 3 things that they did well. They were forward-looking. And you say, well, that seems to be obvious, but yes, they were forward-looking in the sense that they were not just talking about one mode of transportation, and they were not just concerned about making sure that the automobile ran well or the rapid transit system was up to date. They were looking comprehensively at how they were going to improve connectivity in their communities. They were also, and connected to that, is they were bold in their aspirations, which is sometimes tough to do because we often evaluate what we're going to do based on our perception of what we think we can afford, rather than looking at the system in terms of how to make it meaningful over decades, or at least a couple of decades. And then I think one of those cities was hugely successful, Broward County in this case, because of their level of civic engagement. All of the cities, I think, were working on that, but Broward County passed their means of financing the system, and they give great tribute to the level of engagement from citizens and the transparency of the work that they were doing, and how the expectations of citizens were clarified. In other words, in the next 5 years, we're going to be able to do this. In the next 10 years, we're going to be able to do that. Financing will allow us to do that. People then had a dashboard that they could look at and compare where they were going. And it appeared to be a successful engagement process that I keep going back to. We aren't going to succeed in this region unless the citizens are with us and they understand what the benefits are going to be. Because at some point, they have to assess whether or not they want to pay for it. And ultimately, they're the ones that have to pay for it.
Yeah. Well, you bring up a great point because of the responsibilities that I know all of our elected officials who are on today's call or listening in feel with the charge of bringing people along, bringing their constituents along, bringing their ideas into the process and helping us make the case for why coordination is so critical. Our organization, the Centralina Regional Council, we're made up of elected officials that represent every local government, county government in the 9 counties of our study area. Now, granted, the study area for Connect Beyond is a little bit bigger, but we're working in coordination with those other regional councils. And certainly our larger region is much complicated because we have several metropolitan planning organizations also with elected officials that serve on our board, and we have the MTC. So there are a lot of cooks in the kitchen of a lot of really great intentions. And I just want to close out our conversation with maybe hearing from you on what are the top 2 or 3 things that you'd like to see every elected official that touches in the ecosystem of transportation and mobility in our region do to better coordinate with each other and to build a coalition. What is your advice and maybe your expectation that you'd like to share?
That's a tough question, Geraldine, that you're giving me. I don't dare speak to the mayor, Susan Hardin, the mayor of Concord, who's been on this program, and say what you need to be doing. Let me just back up and say what I might be thinking about. I might be thinking about the long-term vision of what I want this region to be about down the road. I might be thinking about my 9 grandchildren and how they're going to navigate in a region and how that region is going to be attractive from all standpoints in terms of educational development, in terms of the development of jobs and good jobs that pay decent wages, about how that region is going to support economic mobility, people moving up from marginal positions to being effective in the economy that we're going to be facing in the years ahead. And in looking at that, I'm going to then say, well, in order to do that, that comes at a cost. There is a price to be paid for vision. There is a price that we may have to pay now that will be insubstantial compared to if we didn't do anything. So whatever that cost may be today that I'm going to ask my constituents to bear, I need to recognize that the cost may be substantially greater if we became a region that became filled with congested highways and trips to work doubling and tripling in time, and air pollution beyond that makes a lot of people sick, and healthcare systems that don't work as well and are not as accessible because they're so difficult to get to. Those are costs that we can't afford as a region. I would care about how beautiful this area is now and how we do the best we can to make the proper investments to support keeping it that way in the years ahead.
Wonderful. Thank you, Megan. I really appreciate your time today. I know we all value your leadership. And I know you have a busy day ahead of you and you might have to drop off our call, but I'm going to throw it back to Michelle because we've got some questions. I'm going to bring the rest of the panel back in. If you're able to stay with us and field a few questions, we'd love to continue to have you, but thank you again.
Geraldine, I can stay for about another 10 minutes, but that's about it.
Wonderful. Thank you. Over to you, Michelle.
Great. Thank you, Geraldine, and thank you, Mayor Gantt. What a fabulous conversation about the future of our region and where we need to be heading, and some very thoughtful insights about maybe what to avoid and how we need to get there. So we do see a few questions in the chat. And one of the first ones I see is there a coordinated effort to bring elected officials together from across the region to better understand transit and the vision? And one of the ways we're going to do that is actually through this committee. The Policy Advisory Committee that we're talking to today is made up of elected officials from across the region, in addition to some key business leaders from across the region. And so through this forum, we will be kind of working this through. But I think the other part of that is then how do we now, once this group of elected officials becomes familiar with this project, how do we spread the word beyond that? And we have something that we're looking at called the Transit Academy, and it's being pulled together. It's somewhat in the vein of the Charlotte Aviation Academy, so a way to basically bring other elected officials and leaders in from across the region to better understand, get a backstage pass of like how does transit work from the nuts and bolts, but also to hear from other regions and maybe how they have either financed some of the projects, how they have served to get over some of the challenges that we might see. What were their lessons learned? So between this committee and then the Transit Advisory, the Transit Academy, those are the ways that we hope to pull that off. Let's see. What other questions do we have here?
So we've got a question in here, I think specifically for Gantt. So how is the work of the Charlotte Moves Task Force different from the ongoing regional planning efforts of CRTPO, Charlotte Alliance, CLT Alliance, and Centralina?
I think we hope we're going to be coordinating with what they're doing. The mayor really has tasked us with defining what this, how do we put together all these various plans that Charlotte has worked on in the area. How do we put that together in such a way that we can come forth with a recommendation for implementation or the beginning of implementation, which is to say, to put a number with what transformational mobility means, and then to recommend to them what that number is likely to be and the possible ways that they can fund and finance that effort. And then our task is done because it then gets into the elected officials having to deal with it from then on, which may mean transactions with various regional bodies, Centralina, the MPO, who knows what, the state government, Tony's group, and the federal government. But our work is to probably say, here's the vision, here's what the network might look like, here's what it's going to likely cost over some period of years. And then we try to help as we can, but not as a task force. We would try to assist in promoting this mobility network that makes things work here.
Thank you. It looks like we have another question related to reaching out to disenfranchised individuals, especially in the more rural areas, understanding their needs and challenges. And I'm going to turn that one over to our project manager, Jason Wager.
Sorry, Michelle, I had to get off on video. Would you mind just repeating that question? I was just looking through the chat and I want to make sure I heard it right.
Sure. The question is, how are we coordinating with disenfranchised individuals, so persons with disabilities, maybe that don't have technology, especially in the more rural areas, to better understand what their needs are and challenges, especially related to mobility and getting from place to place?
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so you mentioned a couple of the other advisory committees a moment ago. the Community Advisory Committee will be kind of a primary place where we will look to, that is just now forming. And so several folks have been able to join us today, but we'll have a kickoff very shortly with that group. And within the group, it's a whole array of community-based organizations that we think from across the region can really give us a lot of ideas for how best to approach those topics. And then, of course, just working throughout the region. We mentioned going kind of MPO by MPO around the region earlier, and we will continue those conversations. We realize that there are several planning agencies, transit agencies. For instance, we at Centralina convene a mobility management group that has a lot of folks that are already participating in providing services to folks in those situations. So we want to make sure we continue to hear what their challenges are. And as you might have seen in the slide earlier that I shared about what's coming up in 2021, we will really dig in on kind of bridging those urban-rural divides and integrating services. So those will be some very specific tasks that this project takes on.
All right, I see another question here about just how we communicate regional connectivity. How do we communicate what's going to be planned in a way that doesn't divide neighborhoods or disproportionately impact disadvantaged communities? And I think, Jorge, you touched on that a little bit in your presentation. Do you want to expand just a little bit on that concept?
Getting myself off the mute there. So one of the things, not to disenfranchise, but actually to make sure that we're taking a close look would be the Transit Propensity Index. It's a composite score of, again, of different mobility needs out there. We are taking that into consideration as part of the if you will, doing the readiness for the different corridors, high priority or visionary corridors. And at the same time, this would be part of recommended action items and strategies for not only high capacity transit corridors, but at the same time, local fixed route bus or neighborhood circulators, or access to sidewalk and connectivity, a mobility hub. And I'm just thinking we will all eventually age, and can we age in place? Can we have identifying a network that we can reach not only transit service if we so choose, but can we have access to sidewalks and a path and a way to reach places of entertainment nearby and just be able to exercise and walk safely across our region? So we will be looking at that. It doesn't, again, not necessarily need to be a large investment, but it could also be a surgical investment in terms of where we're able to walk and bike and just enjoy the great region that we have outside. So I hope that is able to answer some of that question. We are looking at many different ways of mobility, again, not only high capacity transit, but also engagement, and want to make sure that the community is engaged. For example, I'm bilingual, and we have an opportunity later of this presentation to be able to engage anyone interested in speaking and learning more about the project that is Spanish speaking, for example. So just different tools in our toolbox to be able to engage.
Jorge, while I've got you, there is another question here that I think you would be best served to answer, and that is, how will this project impact paratransit? You spoke a little bit about the layering effect of the high capacity transit corridors, some mobility hubs and connections, but specifically to paratransit, if you could talk a little bit to that.
So that's a really great question. In terms of paratransit, if we identify a fixed route service, you have to be thinking at the same time of the complementary ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act service that needs to be underlying that service. But at the same time, can we think a little bit different and see of first mile, last mile connections, partnerships with TNCs or transportation network companies? There are areas that are well served with fixed route transit, okay? And there are areas where the return on investment on fixed route transit may not lend itself to the productivity, but we're, in terms of measuring how many people are boarding, what's the investment per hour. So maybe there are areas in our region that don't lend themselves to that, but they could lend themselves to flex route services, deviated fixed route services. And we're looking at those. But for paratransit itself, we want to make sure that if an extension or some sort of fixed route service is identified, the complementary service is not an afterthought. It is right now that we draw that 3/4 of a mile buffer. And then outside of that, again, TNCs, mobility hubs, pathways, and just thinking overall about the future. As Mayor Gantt was saying, just be bold and visionary and think different of how we're able to connect areas that may not be well suited for fixed route service, but through other partnerships and demand responsive service. There's many different ways, and we are looking at those strategies as well. That would be part of this effort.
Thank you, Jorge. And just we've got a few follow-up questions for the panelists based on some of the thoughts that we heard from Mayor Gantt. And I guess the first one I'll turn over to John Lewis, and that is with this project we are obviously creating the vision, and the makeup of this policy advisory committee really highlights the cooperation across the region. But to get anything done, we're going to need champions, such as local leaders from the community and elected officials at the state and local level. And we're going to need those folks to help lead these initiatives. So based on your experience, because you've led many of these major initiatives, talk to us a little bit about the importance of that and the importance of folks on this call and others really helping to lead the charge as we move forward.
Thank you, Michelle. And I think that is a great question and really a critical to the ultimate success of this effort. So I think we look at it in stages. First, you have to create the plan, and we are well along that path right now, beginning not just with as I mentioned earlier, the 2030 plan being sort of the hub of that regional mobility network, but now we're expanding beyond just the urban core. So as we develop a plan that meets everyone's varied needs within our wider community, at the same time, as Mayor Gantt has talked about, we're having a very deliberate conversation on what are the opportunities to fund that effort. Once we have an understanding of what the plan will deliver and what are our options to implement that plan, then I really think it makes that discussion about how do we bring together that group of champions that understand the vision, that see the tactical means in which we can achieve that vision, and then become almost prophets of disciples of that vision. And so I think that is the next logical phase of where we're coming. We're finishing the plan now. We're developing ways to pay for that and implement it. Then we begin the wider community discussion on bringing the wider community along with us on this effort.
Thank you. And just as a follow-up to that, Pat, I'd ask you to be thinking about, from the local leadership side and the elected side, we know we're also going to need strong and active business community support. We have business community leaders on this policy advisory committee, but we know that we've got to dig deeper as the project moves on. What is the best way, in your opinion, that we can be connecting with local business leaders in the community?
Well, I think their path for connecting with businesses is clearly parallel.
I heard all of Pat, and then my audio went out. Sorry about that, Michelle. Could you repeat that quickly?
That's okay. Sure. So building on what John had to talk about the importance of having elected leaders and local champions, how can we best engage the business community? We have business community leaders on this committee, but we know as we move forward, we're going to need that strong and active business community to be really supportive of this project and the local projects that come from it. So, what's the best way for us to do that?
I think first and foremost, what we have to do is help the business community see the value in transportation and transit, so that they can be the disciples that John mentioned, in a way that they're speaking to the benefit that can be created, the long-term benefit. What we've seen in the past with some of these huge initiatives like this, costly initiatives, is that people will not understand the complexity of it and really look at the short-term costs. And for instance, say, I don't want that train, I'm never going to ride it, so I'm not going to support the funding for it. So what we have to do is be able to help educate and communicate what this really does bring to the future of our region, and get that buy-in, so that people are out there communicating that to elected officials, to their other peer business owners. And we have a common voice and a unified voice of really how this is going to position us for a competitive advantage for businesses and residents, and frankly for visitors too in this region. And we can't start that early enough. So this work that you all are doing really helps position us for that. And then we need to craft that message and make sure that it's clear, so that it does not become a cost argument down the road. It really is a values discussion of where we want to be, what is the future state for this region, and how does mobility and transportation fit into that.
Thank you. And I just want to say again, thank you to all the panelists that have been part of the program. Such interesting and informative insights for us as we move forward. So with that, we are going to turn it back over to Geraldine Gardner to provide some closing thoughts and see us on our way out. Geraldine?
Thank you, Michelle. And I might spontaneously invite my co-captain, John Lewis, if he's still with us here, to join me in offering some closing remarks as well, since it is both of our teams and our organizations that are helping to lead this effort. I just have a couple of practical things that I'll throw out to the group, and then John and I can offer some remarks. So just in terms of what's next and what to expect, I just want to say thank you to all of you for joining the conversation today. I know each and every one of you is extremely busy. These Zoom calls are part of our daily rhythm and existence at this point. So the fact that you are very engaged and asked thoughtful questions really means a lot, and it shows us that you're happy to be a part of this initiative and really committed to the process. Just a note on that, we knew there were some questions that we weren't able to get to, so we will certainly provide some responses to those. I also want to invite open communication and dialogue with all members of our different committees. We really want to make sure we're helping equip you with what information that you need to be a part of this process. You heard on our schedule that the next meeting isn't in until January, but there's a lot of things that we need to do between now and then. So whether it's reporting back to your councils, commissions, your community organizations, or the boards of your companies and organizations, let us know what information you need. We'll be, pardon me, we'll be sharing out with you via email the corridors that you saw today, the candidate corridors, and inviting feedback. The project team will be taking all the input from this particular meeting and presenting the candidate corridors for public comment in early October. We're also launching a really important community survey that will help bring more perspectives into the process. So we'll be reaching out to you and really would like to invite you to help disseminate that. In terms of reflections from today's conversation, I just want to offer that, I was really inspired by the mayor's comments today about being visionary and being bold and not holding us back, but keeping an eye to implementation. I really think that mobility can be that through line that connects us and brings our region together and helps make this region a model for cooperation. John, what were some of your highlights or takeaways from today's conversation, and any parting words you want to offer the group before we wrap up?
Thank you, Geraldine. And before I move to my comments, I really want to take a moment to thank the project team. You've done an excellent job in moving this really exciting discussion forward, particularly in this new reality that we have. I think the first discussion that we had in this regard, we were all sitting around a table in one room. We've gone beyond that to figuring out how to connect with stakeholders and community members virtually while continuing to move this effort forward. So thank you, job well done, and continue on. I think I really enjoyed the conversation today, both from the Mayor Gantt's unbelievable leadership on this. I think there's no surprise how successful this region has been in the past and will continue to be in the future when you have this kind of leadership across the board, not just city leaders in the past, but we have town mayors and CRTPO members and MTC, Metropolitan Transit Commission leadership coming together behind this effort to move this entire community together. And I think we have a great opportunity. I think it makes it easier from our standpoint, from a staff, to do the nitty-gritty work, knowing that we have those kind of champions supporting us. So I think this was another great step forward as we continue to define the needs and provide of this region and provide options. I think we will continue to move the discussion forward. And so I look forward to the upcoming work, and thank you everyone who's taken time out this morning to participate.
Thank you, John. And thank you again to the rest of the panelists and to our team. We appreciate everyone's time and look forward to keeping in touch with you in the coming weeks ahead. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and thanks again.